No longer that we are inside of time and space, but we are co-creating time and space inside of ourselves, outside of ourselves.
This is Jim Bratton Podcast. You may enjoy some, or all, or none. Now, here's Jim.
This is the Jim Bratton Podcast. Today we're talking to Ayeh Kashani. You're a PhD candidate at the California Institute of Integral Studies, correct?
That is right.
Thank you for joining us today. So the crux of this is a paper that you recently published called Towards a Participatory Philosophical Religion, the Foundations for a Sacramental Metaphysics of Psychedelics. So I'm really excited about doing it. And you work at the intersection of philosophy, spirituality, and the modern psychedelic movement. I read your paper. Guys, you jump back in history and your philosophy and religion. Can we just jump in with a couple of questions? Number one, what prompted this paper? Can we start with that?
Sure. Well, my dissertation work itself is at the intersection of psychedelic studies, consciousness studies, really, and metaphysics.
Right.
So I've been working with the ideas at the core of the paper for a long time.
Yeah.
The idea that in these psychedelic spaces, we're not just going into some hallucinatory space and it's just something inside of your head and that's that. There's something deeper here. And that took me into metaphysics, which the history part of the paper kind of touches on this history of the Western consciousness as it comes to know itself in different ways eventually ends up with this separation of subjective reality and objective reality. We end up kind of putting them against each other and giving reality to the objective world. And we say that whatever is inside of our psyches is just a reflection of that objective world. So whenever we do end up having a psychedelic experience, that must be a hallucination because it's not happening outside. It's not real.
So it's not really a continuum. You're talking about in your studies a continuum of reality, or what's inside or what's outside.
Right. Exactly. So what I just described is more the mechanistic worldview that science goes with. And the alternative that I've been studying is an organic worldview, where instead of seeing subject and object as two different things and with no real bridge between them,
Right.
we're seeing them as two sides of the same underlying being. So we're kind of shifting the let's say abstractions that we use from the scientific world to then say what is the universe doing, right? Instead of going to matter and causality the way that Newtonian physics used to do, which physics itself has since moved past.
It's certainly evolved past that, yes.
Yeah, we passed that. So then our metaphysics needs to catch up with that as well. And the shift that I'm seeing that I'm really excited about is moving towards biology, embryogenesis, and psychology, finding out that it has this deep connection with the body in a way that's not coming out of the body, but that it's been evolving with it this whole time, since the beginning of the Big Bang even.
You're talking about billions and billions of years of evolution then.
Yeah, exactly. And instead of starting at life and saying evolution began at life, we're looking at a much bigger scale now.
I'm going to ask you so going back to the 60s, 70s and the Timothy O'Leary area, the implicit thing of what you're saying is then that was a fairly primitive look at psychedelics.
Yeah, that was a very primitive. I don't know if primitive
Okay,
works
it was enlightening, but it was more simplistic.
It's actually a very modern way of looking at psychedelics. That's the modern consciousness thinks of it as we don't have the same containers that some of these older cultures have.
So you're saying, okay, so I misread that. So what you're saying is that the 70s and stuff really began to stretch those boundaries. And is that what I'm hearing then?
Yeah, I think it really depends on how we look at it, which part of his story we're looking at it. If we're looking at it from the Western world, the
Right.
consciousness of the Western worldview that went through from Greece into um, Europe and then made it into America. Um, what I kind of touched on this in the paper. There is this um, a movement against religion that happens coming with the scientific movement, 17th century, uh,
Yes.
trying to really ground into, okay, we can actually collect data and prove everything based on data, and we don't need the texts anymore, we don't need the dogma anymore. And that was
Right.
a whole movement itself of secularization.
Right. What what
And
what was the time frame on that, by the way? Who were the leaders on that of the physicists? What was that in the 1800s then,
17,
or even
18.
before that,
Do I,
maybe?
do I know my history well enough? Let's see. I know, I mean, Newton himself was already. One of the things, is interesting things here is, though, that every time you're looking at one of these big names that have shifted us away from this religious ideas and more towards
Right.
a scientific view, they themselves were doing this work from a spiritual place.
They were in many cases. I hate to I'll put this word in air quotes if you would. They were in many cases believers.
They were believers. They were, they believed that they were seeing the world from the point of view of God, and that the world itself is accessible by our rational mind because there's this link between human and the creator of the world. So we can actually go into the logical reality of how things work. And that's something that's at the core of the scientific movement itself, but it actually comes from Christianity.
Yeah.
So there is this movement against Christianity, and what I'm touching on is this movement back towards spirit, because we did put that behind when we left dogma.
Right.
And
Okay.
then, and what I'm pointing to in this paper is that psychedelics are bringing um, a wave of that back. There is this return to the actual experience of something deeper and more meaningful, and they're starting to question our mechanistic worldview and the scientific view of consciousness and our relationship to reality and creation itself.
Does this also drift into the quantum physics area sometimes as well? Then is that sort of
Yeah,
does that begin an overlap there?
absolutely. I think there are ways to talk about it. Quantum mechanics has definitely was one of the first, I guess, waves of scientific um, movement going against the mechanistic view.
Right. Well, let me just go back to sort of my original train of thought on this, since listen, I could take this conversation for hours, all right? So I'm not sure our listeners would. All right. So, all right. When we hear psychedelics, we recently been thinking of medical or scientific terms. They talk about depression,
Mhm.
PTSD, neural networks, whole brain chemistry. This is all basically bio, but sort of a limited scope on that. So, if you haven't, if you, I'm not studied in philosophy, but listeners who haven't either, we've sort of outlined what's missing in the whole psychedelic conversation. Take me a little bit further on that, then.
Yeah. So something I touched about in the paper was is the psychedelic movement itself, right? And as you said, this is something that started in the Western world. It came out in the '60s, '50s, but '60s really made it a cultural thing.
Right,
Um, and from the beginning, it was either a at least in the Western world, it was either something to be researched with, or it's
right,
something that the counterculture was running with, that they were then fighting, and the whole history of that.
right,
And so we recently had a resurgence after a long time of psychedelics being illegal. They have returned to science. We can do
right.
research within the labs. Now we're starting to see it coming out more in terms of psychedelic medicine, and the narrative around it is shifting from something casual and for the culture itself to something that's, like you said, it's good for it's psychologically healing us.
So
And
this
there's a
almost
lot of
becomes
different things. Mhm.
looked at as a pharmaceutical almost then.
Yeah, that's a good term for it. There are government. Some of the states have already passed different legislation around how to be licensed And a lot of them are leaning heavily on physicians and
Right.
nurses, and trainings that are focusing on psychology. And in
Science.
that, science, yeah, the scientific method is has a hold of the psychedelics, and it's doing what science always does. Um, and as
So
part of
science has got some real guardrails on it. Despite its open-mindedness, science can have some narrow guardrails depending on what the discipline is, I'm guessing.
yeah, definitely there is because at the end of it, the scientific method has settled into its ways,
Yeah.
and without really saying so, they have adopted a mechanistic worldview. Scientists don't really like to talk about the metaphysics that they believe in because they're like, oh, that's not our job, but they do believe it, and they do dismiss a lot of data. Not all of them, of course, but the general consensus is if you want to be taken seriously, you're going to dismiss the spiritual things, the um, more mystical components, and really focus on, are you healing? Are you can things that you can do data collection around, right?
Let's drift back to some of the core things you talked. You talked about the participation in reality. This is from my notes here. Okay, so put that in layman terms for me. The participating in reality, and then how that ties in with psychedelics.
So the participatory way of thinking about our role in reality is coming in a position to the let's say the mainstream consensus being that we are objects inside of the world,
Right.
and there are laws that are running, and we are just like any object. We are moving around with these laws, and everything is statistical, and we are just kind of in it, and things are happening to us. I think it's my way of describing the mainstream way that we think about ourselves.
Okay.
That we are not really affecting the world is affecting us.
Right.
And the participatory way of looking at it is going to that organic worldview where we are part of the universe, we are part of reality in a deep metaphysical sense. Consciousness itself is part of reality in the deep metaphysical sense. And that our being, our movement through the world is in a way the world unfolding itself. It's kind of like if you think about, um, we are the universe looking back onto itself, and in that
Right.
sense we are co-creating the stories that we're living, the reality that is unfolding in front of us, the phenomenological world. We are part of that creation of the universe.
I got to tell
So
you, somebody like me with a degree in engineering is inclined to look at things, I don't know, as a spatial representation. Yeah, I mean,
mhm.
even mathematics, I see it spatially. This is getting a little bit elastic for me.
Yes, exactly, exactly. You really hit it on the head, right there. Is it's We are actually questioning our linear understanding of time and space when we move into this organic worldview, because now every organic being, which technically is everything, it's not
Right.
just self-conscious beings. Even the rock is an organic being, it's just of a different caliber,
Right.
right? And every organic being is its own center of space-time. It's no longer that we are inside of time and space, but we are co-creating time and space inside of ourselves, outside of ourselves. That gets a little confusing,
It
maybe,
does. Well, it does.
but
And
it's all inside, anyways.
it's all of,
Yeah.
I mean, it's like this infinite continuum that it's
Hmm.
impressive to me, but it's hard for me to understand. And thank you for leading me into this because it's helping me. Now, let's look into the religion aspects of this, and particularly when in your paper you talk about sacramental metaphysics of psychedelics.
Hmm.
The word sacrament is pretty loaded for a lot of people. Let's talk
Sure.
about,
Yeah.
and it's used in organized religion a lot.
Hmm.
For people that are familiar with the aspects, the sacraments of organized religion, where do psychedelics fall in this? And are we being overly simplistic when we try to equate them as the sacraments as we think of them in traditional religion?
Yeah, I think let's see where to begin with this.
Well, that's all right. Take your time.
Like you said, there's a lot of history and a lot of trauma involved with religion. And
Yes.
and I think that's part of the movement of where we are now in the world, is a move away from religion. And in that process, we kind of end up, because religion is holding that inner link to the self, we end up
Right.
losing that in putting away religion.
In traditional religion, that has been an
Yeah,
aspect, a serious, I mean,
yeah.
a real aspect. I'm appreciative of the fact that even you're venturing into some new area here. You're not ridiculing organized or past religious experience or organizations.
Yeah, I think, the history has the history, and that's part of anything you look into is going to have its shadows. And the
Yes,
bigger it gets, the bigger the shadow is going to get. And religion has been, I think religion is one of the first layers. Maybe some say philosophy came first, depending on where you're looking, but they are this first layer of the sense of I'm here
yes,
and I have a relationship with the world.
right,
And what is that? And then from that you get all different, that's really the whole history of religion and philosophy, and even now psychology,
right.
is trying to understand what is happening, and how can I connect to it, and be a part of it. For me, that's where that difference between sacrament versus medicine for psychedelics. um, Medicine has, it's coming out of this modern putting away the connection of the self with something bigger than me.
Well, it's a
And
quantification, always.
yeah, and it's great, it works. You take a medicine and it works, but
Right,
that's exactly where you lose that participatory part, where you take a medicine and it does something for you.
right,
And a sacrament is, it's something that you commune with.
right.
It's a source of connection to something deeper inside of you. Now, in psychology and transpersonal psychology, we have terms like, the inner healing intelligence. This idea that when you take psychedelics, there's something in you that brings up the content that needs to come, and it's moving you towards healing. And it knows what it needs to do. You don't need to know what's happening. It will take care of things. And religion, we might see this in a different sense, that there's some spirit within you that you're kind of connecting with and communing with through the psychedelics. And what I wanted to bring out with this paper was, and it's touching it from different perspectives. One part of it is the legal component, of course,
Right.
of freedom of religion gives you a layer of protection with psychedelics. But the other part of it is this shift of, what we expect from these psychedelics and what we believe we're actually doing. Are we just going into our heads and untangling some stuff and now I feel better? Or are we connecting to something deeper and more meaningful and larger than ourselves, that we are a product of? We're tapping into an ancient connection that has been trying to be articulated for a very long time in human history.
So us or beyond us, I guess, is
Yeah,
sort of the
within
difference.
us, and yeah, and it turns out we need to go through us to get to that thing that is beyond us, and it's not something outside of you, it's actually something inside. So it's more resonant with esoteric kind of thinking than and versus mainstream dogma.
Right.
And this is something that I touched on in the paper, this movement beyond dogma. And in the paper I talk about it specifically in the context of Christianity, but it's something that I think resonates with all religions and all traditions, is finding out the inner essence of what the experience, that inner experiential essence of where that religion is trying to point to.
You mentioned transpersonal just a second ago, and now later you talk about transpersonal ministry. Does that
Right.
take us into the utilization you're talking about right here beyond the transpersonal psychology? Or,
Yeah, I think it does. Transpersonal psychology is something that came out, it was officially uh, birthed in 69.
mhm.
And it came out of the intersection of psychology, psychiatry, and the psychedelic movement. And along with that was a lot of Eastern philosophies that are coming into the United States at the time, and it was becoming very popular. So it's this coming together of really the sciences and the counterculture, with the psychedelics holding in the middle. Um, and what they really started focusing on was the spiritual component of experience, of the human component of the human experience,
Right.
that the spiritual components matter in the psychological field, and we need to take that seriously. And since then, it's evolved into philosophy. There's transpersonal philosophy that's trying to talk about the metaphysics that psychedelics are pointing to. And what I talk about in the paper is in the context of the current resurgence of psychedelics. And we have things like psychedelic ministry becoming very popular as a
Right.
way to move away from psychedelic um, therapy necessarily, and be holding a more spiritual container for spiritual growth and development. And I want to bring that into conversation with the transpersonal lineage, to bring in the philosophy and the spirituality in a grounded way.
This is such an interesting subject. I wish we had a whole lot more time. We're starting to run out of time.
Mhm.
As a wrap up, I think you gathered through our conversation. I'm intrigued, but I'm stretched. It's as a person who sees things spatially, it's on the edge of my comprehension, but you're helping me see it in another way. Where do you see everything headed, and what would be your goal? You're doing a lot of research on this. I can see this paper took a lot to put together.
Well, thanks.
Where where do you where do you see things going, and what part do you think you want to play in that?
Oh, there's so many different directions that everything could be going, and I think it's really um, a multi-layered thing.
Yeah.
But I'm excited about the pragmatic, the practical components. Um, I am really excited about not just psychedelics themselves, but these states of consciousness that we can achieve with even things like breath work, for example. There's things like Groff breath work, which
Right.
came out of transpersonal psychology, and it came out of LSD research. And
Really.
yeah, in these states we can access, and it's not so much about going in and finding beautiful landscapes, and it's something deeper and more visceral, almost, of
Is
this
that
connection.
holotropic style breathing? Is
It
that what
is.
you? Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, it is holotropic
Or
breath work.
circular breathing?
Yeah, that's the one. It
I think I've
is.
done an hour of that along the way,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it took you to another place.
It takes you to another place, and it's very communal because it's something you do in a
Yeah,
group, in a community. And
with a leader.
um, with a leader, you have your peer. One of your peers is sitting by your side, and
Yeah.
making sure you have everything you need, and then you do the same thing for them. So the whole thing is very building community. And I love the ways that you can see, like, the psychedelic movement trickling into the world. There's a lot happening at the peak of it all, or at the pinnacle of the movement, where there's, like, a lot of research, a lot of psychedelic therapy, psychedelic guides. But then you also see it trickling into just the common things that you see. And I'm really excited about that part when
Well,
when you start noticing the shift in culture, and the shift in the way that we understand ourselves in relationship to the planet.
you know, you have brought some language that I have difficulty understanding. I have to be candid on that, but I feel like I've got a closer sense of it now, and I would like to continue this at another time as well, okay?
Mhm.
Because we've opened the door on this. And Ayeh Kashani, I have to thank you very, very much for joining the Jim Bratton podcast today.
Thank you very much. And I want to leave y'all with some. My Instagram is Ayeh Kashani, Ayehkashani. And you can also go to our website for any breathwork related things, and different workshops at technologiesofthesacred.com.
Great, and we'll put all of these at the description of the podcast as well.
Great.
Those links will be at the intro page to the podcast. This has been interesting. For me, it's been an intellectual stretch, been a philosophic stretch, and I think that was probably the purpose of your paper, which was towards a philosophical religion. Foundations for Sacramental Metaphysics of Psychedelics. Wow. Ayeh
Thank you
Kashani,
so much, Jim.
thanks for joining us.
This has been Jim Breton Podcast. We hope you have enjoyed, been inspired, informed, angered, or otherwise emotionally stimulated. This is your booth announcer, Sierra Sakel.